Hey, what's up? Welcome back to your channel name. This time, we're going to dive into a story that will make you think twice before walking alone at night. Grab some snacks, turn off the lights, and listen closely.
Autumn was in full swing when Eleanor Moore set foot in England. The wind carried the scent of wet leaves, and a thin mist clung to the narrow roads leading into the old town of Stratford-upon-Avon. She had just signed the contract for her 8th novel, a crime thriller set in a historic hotel, and she craved a location that was not just quiet but layered with history, something that could ignite her imagination. A longtime friend, a photographer of old architecture, had once whispered a name she hadn't forgotten: the Eversfield Hotel. A Victorian building said to hold more dark secrets than vacant rooms. The hotel stood tall behind a rusting wrought iron fence, staring down the deserted street like a sentinel guarding the slow passage of time. Its facade was clad in aging green-gray stone, and the tall, arched windows resembled the watchtowers of a forgotten castle. As Eleanor stepped up to the heavy wooden door that creaked faintly with age, an odd sensation swept over her. Not fear, something stranger. A quiet, pressing awareness that she was being watched, though the courtyard around her was completely empty. The long trip from Canada had worn her down, but something about the place kept her senses alert. The classic room layouts, the threadbare oriental carpets, and the faint scent of aged wood mixed with dried flowers, it all whispered of a time no travel brochure ever mentioned. And that was exactly what she needed, something that could make the story come alive. The hotel lobby welcomed her with the soft glow of warm lighting and antique furniture that looked like colonial-era relics. No sooner had Eleanor placed her suitcase by the reception than a man emerged from behind a thick velvet curtain, immaculately dressed, clean-shaven, and smiling far too widely for the early hour. A brass name tag on his chest read, "Mr. Beckett." He welcomed Eleanor with a surprising level of enthusiasm, like a host greeting a long-lost guest. He knew her full name without glancing at any reservation log and casually mentioned her flight details. Eleanor nodded politely, though internally she began to wonder how he had gathered such specifics. His cheerfulness felt rehearsed, his mannerisms too polished, like someone imitating hospitality from a bygone era. What made her skin crawl, however, was the way he spoke of the hotel. Not as a place of work, but as something alive, almost sacred. There was a reverent glow in his voice when he described the corridors, the quiet, the guests that used to stay. His pride in the hotel seemed to stretch far beyond professionalism. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor caught something strange in Mr. Beckett's eyes, a deep, brittle exhaustion, like a man who hadn't truly rested in years. His smile remained, but his eyes whispered another story. Still, she accepted the old-fashioned iron key he handed her, not a keycard, but a large, worn key attached to a metal tag that read simply, 606. As Eleanor walked toward the elevator, something odd made her pause. The elevator button stopped at level 5. There was no sign of a 6th floor, no hidden button, no blank space where one might have been. She stared again at her key, 606. The number clearly implied a 6th floor that didn't seem to exist. Just as she turned to ask, Mr. Beckett was suddenly beside her, as if he'd been anticipating the question. Without a word, he pressed a small wooden panel on the side of the elevator's button board, something no casual guest would ever notice. A soft click followed, and suddenly, a dim 6 appeared in the top corner of the panel. The button had emerged like a secret, its pale yellow glow flickering faintly as if unsure whether it wanted to be seen. The elevator creaked into motion, rising slowly with groaning gears that sounded like bone scraping against stone. There was no music, only the labored breath of the old machine as it ascended. When the 6th floor indicator finally lit up, the doors groaned open. What lay beyond wasn't like the rest of the hotel. The corridor was darker, its wallpaper peeling at the edges. A chandelier hung low, casting skewed shadows across the hall. The 6th floor wasn't just hidden, it felt like it wasn't meant to be there at all. Eleanor stared at the elevator's control panel after the doors closed again. The number 6 had vanished. The panel returned to its original state, like nothing had ever been altered. If she hadn't seen it herself, she might have thought it was a hallucination born of fatigue. But the way Mr. Beckett had moved, so fluid, so practiced, he had done this many times before. As the elevator started climbing, she caught one last glimpse of Mr. Beckett through the narrowing gap in the doors. His expression hadn't changed. He held her gaze until the doors fully sealed. Just before they shut, she thought she saw him lean in and murmur something into the emptiness of the lobby. The ride upward was slow and unnatural. When the sixth floor reappeared on the screen, it was like entering a different dimension. The air shifted. It wasn't just cooler, it felt heavier, as if saturated with something old. The lighting dimmed as the elevator halted, and the doors opened to reveal the same eerie corridor. The atmosphere was oppressive. The carpet looked older, the wallpaper more decayed. Everything here felt as if it had been sealed off from time. The hallway stretched ahead, narrow and cloaked in a gray dimness that turned sharp corners into shadows. Eleanor stepped out cautiously. Her boots pressed into the deep, worn fibers of the red carpet, which had darkened to almost black in high-traffic areas. The air was stagnant and laced with a faint, cloying scent of dried lilies and rotting wood. To her left, the walls were lined with faded paintings framed in tarnished gold. They depicted stern-looking individuals, possibly former guests or staff, though none bore any identifying plaques or dates. The expressions on their faces were blank, yet somehow, their painted eyes followed her progress down the hall. One painting caught her attention, a man in a hotel uniform standing beside a luggage cart. The unsettling part wasn't the subject but the subtle, lifelike detail in his eyes. Above her, dim chandeliers hung low, their bulbs flickering slightly, swaying ever so gently despite the stillness in the air. In the distance, one light blinked, a single strobe that hinted at movement somewhere ahead. The silence was unnerving, thick and absolute. At the far end of the hallway, the door to room 606 loomed. Its number plate gleamed dully above a tall, dark wooden door that looked heavier than the others. Its doorknob was brass, sculpted into the shape of a lion's head, mouth slightly ajar as if mid-growl. Eleanor stood before it, her breath hitching. Something about the space pressed against her chest, like the hallway itself was alive and waiting. She slid the key into the lock. A slow click echoed through the corridor, followed by the low groan of the door swinging open. The scent of lilies hit her like a wave, stronger now, almost suffocating. She had just stepped into a room that would change her life, or slowly take it from her, piece by piece. The room greeted her with a silence so absolute, it almost felt engineered. Eleanor stood just inside the doorway of room 606, the key still clenched in her fingers. A heavy wave of fragrance rushed at her, lilies, thick and cloying, but now intertwined with the unmistakable staleness of mold and moisture long trapped behind sealed walls. The kind of scent that didn't come from nature but from something that had lingered far too long. She closed the door behind her with a slow push. The moment the latch clicked into place, the air inside changed again, cooler now, as though the room had exhaled in response. Dust motes drifted in slants of pale light slipping through the long, sheer curtains. The room looked preserved, almost like a stage set frozen in time. Heavy, carved furniture stood perfectly placed. A velvet armchair sat beside an ornate fireplace that hadn't been used in decades. The bed was made, but the sheets were an odd shade, too white, too crisp, as though untouched for years yet still freshly laid. What disturbed her most wasn't the sight but the sensation. She felt observed, though she was alone. The mirrors on the wardrobe reflected straw. Eleanor began unpacking, trying to shake off the unease. She reached for her journal and placed it on the old wooden desk near the window. That's when she noticed it, the picture frame beside the lamp. Its image was of the hotel, taken many decades ago, judging by the black and white tones and the horse-drawn carriage parked out front. As she leaned in for a closer look, the frame tipped forward on its own and crashed face down on the desk. The glass didn't break, but the fall had shifted something inside. When she lifted it, the original photograph had slipped halfway out, revealing another photo hidden behind it. This second image was different. It showed the same hallway she'd just walked through, dim, decayed, but unmistakably the sixth floor. Standing at the end of it was a figure. A man in a hotel uniform, stiff and still, just barely visible in the shadows. The strangest part was that his head was slightly turned toward the camera, as if he'd noticed being watched right before the photo was taken. His face, however, was blurred, not from motion, but as though someone had scratched it out with delicate precision. Eleanor felt her breath catch. There was no explanation for why this photo had been tucked away, nor why it depicted something so eerily current, yet impossible to date. Something about it felt wrong, as if it hadn't just been a photo, but a warning left behind for someone who might come looking. Later that evening, as dusk began to descend and the glow from the streetlights below painted long shadows across the room, Eleanor found herself drawn to the antique mirror above the fireplace. Its frame was ornately gilded, vines and angels carved in soft relief, their faces eroded by time. But the glass was too clear, too still. She stood before it, watching her reflection. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. But when she lifted her hand slowly, her reflection was half a second too slow. The gesture was identical, but the timing was off. She tested it again, shifting her head to the left, blinking slowly. Again, her reflection mimicked her just a breath too late, as if it were playing catch-up, like a video feed lagging behind reality. A strange sensation spread across her skin, like cold static. She moved away from the mirror, and the reflection vanished. But in that final second, she swore the figure in the mirror kept watching her, longer than it should have. As if the mirror hadn't been showing her at all, but something pretending to be her, and failing to hide it completely. She turned her back to the glass, trying not to glance again. Outside, the mist had grown thicker, curling around the edges of the sixth-floor window like pale fingers creeping inward. Sleep became impossible. The air inside room 606 was too heavy, pressing down like invisible hands. Around midnight, Eleanor decided to step out, if only to clear her head. The hallway outside was silent and unchanged, but the darkness had thickened. The chandeliers above had dimmed further, though no bulb had burned out. She walked slowly down the hall, counting the rooms. 601, 602, but when she reached room 602, she paused. The door was different, reinforced, almost bolted. Unlike the others, its handle had been removed completely. A thick strip of black sealant lined its edges, and a faint mark above the number plate suggested that something, maybe a warning sign, had once been nailed there, then removed. Eleanor felt her hand reach out instinctively, her fingertips brushing the smooth surface of the door. It was cold, unnaturally so, even compared to the chill of the corridor. There was no sound from inside, but a pressure vibrated faintly through the wood, as if something on the other side was awake, waiting in silence. She stepped back quickly, her heart pounding for no reason she could explain. It was only when she turned around that she noticed the long trail of dust leading from room 602 to her own room, like something had been dragged, or had crawled, between them recently. The hours dragged on. Eleanor had returned to room 606, locking the door firmly and drawing the curtains. She left the lamp on, needing some sliver of warmth in the eerie stillness. But the quiet didn't last. Around 2:17 a.m., she heard it, footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. They started near the elevator and moved toward her door, each step pausing slightly longer than the last, as if the walker was unsure whether to stop. The steps reached her door and halted. Silence. She held her breath, heart thundering. No knock followed. Just presence. A stillness so oppressive it began to fill the room, like smoke without scent. Then the footsteps began again, but this time they didn't walk away. They circled. Around her door. Again. And again. As if the figure outside wasn't human, but something studying her from the other side. There was no breathing, no shadow beneath the door, no whisper of movement except those precise, quiet steps. When she finally dared to check, flinging the door open in a burst of courage, the hallway was empty. Except, on the carpet, were faint wet footprints. Bare feet. They stopped right at her door, and then vanished completely. The following morning, Eleanor descended to the front desk under the pretense of asking for extra towels, but her real purpose was different. Something about room 606, about its feel, its mirrors, the scent, the photograph, had rooted a suspicion in her. The man at reception, a different one than last night, seemed polite but distracted. As he turned to retrieve her request, she leaned slightly over the counter, eyes drawn to the large leather-bound book resting on a stand behind him. The hotel's logbook was old-fashioned, filled with handwritten names, dates, and room assignments, charming at first glance, but now strangely ominous. She scanned the entries for the 6th floor. Room 601. 602, and then she found 606. There were entries, yes. But they were old. The last listed occupant had checked in 12 years ago, in neat cursive ink, Marjorie Halstead. But beneath that, in the column meant for checkout date, there was only a smudged dash. No signature. No checkout. Nothing afterward. Not even a new entry to suggest the room had been used again. Curious, she glanced at the adjacent pages. Rooms around it had seen guests frequently. But 600 and SIXS line ended there. Frozen. Forgotten, or intentionally left blank. As if the hotel had never officially reclaimed it. A vacancy that was never truly vacant. She thanked the receptionist with a forced smile and walked away. But a shadow of the woman's name lingered in her mind. Marjorie Halstead. A name that felt cold even without a face. Later that day, Eleanor wandered into the dimly lit lounge on the mezzanine, drawn to a shelf filled with aged books and magazines, leftovers from another era. Among them, a brittle copy of the Montreux Gazette, yellowed with time, practically crumbled in her hands as she opened it. Flipping through pages of faded ink and irrelevant headlines, her eyes locked onto a small column under the obituaries section. The headline read, Chateau Meruel staff death raises questions. The article described the death of a young maid, Eloise Marchand, age 24, found unresponsive inside one of the 6th-floor rooms, room unspecified. Her death was ruled sudden cardiac arrest, though the autopsy revealed no health issues. Rumors among the staff hinted that she had become obsessed with the guest staying in one of the rooms, a reclusive woman who never left, and who, according to whispers, had already been dead for days by the time anyone realized. The article included an unsettling detail. Before her death, Eloise had complained to colleagues that she heard someone whispering her name each time she passed the 6th-floor corridor. No voice was ever recorded, and no one else heard it. The story had never been followed up. Just a strange, tragic footnote in a forgotten paper. But Eleanor knew, somehow, that the guest and the room mentioned were not unrelated to the one she now occupied. That evening, determined not to remain in the suffocating atmosphere of room 606, Eleanor stepped into the hallway once again. As soon as her foot crossed the threshold, the light above her buzzed and dimmed. She paused. It returned to normal. She continued walking, and again, the next bulb flickered. Then the next. And the next. It wasn't erratic. It was synchronized with her movement. Every step she took seemed to trigger a localized glitch, as if the entire 6th floor responded to her presence like a living organism. There were no sounds, no footsteps, no voices, just this subtle disruption in the lighting. Yet the effect was unnerving, like she was being tracked. At the end of the hall, near room 617, she stopped and turned around. For a moment, all the lights held steady. Then, starting from the far end, each light slowly dimmed in sequence. From 601 to where she stood. Like a countdown. When the bulb above her finally blinked, everything went black. Only for 3 seconds. When the lights came back, nothing had moved. But her heart was thudding so violently, she had to grip the wall to stay upright. Something was playing with her. Something that knew she was there. The next day, Eleanor found herself pacing the 6th-floor hallway again, this time without purpose. It was as though the corridor had begun calling her in quiet moments. Midway through her walk, she noticed something new. An old maid's cart, one she hadn't seen before, was parked in front of room 602. The cart was rusted and draped in dust. A faded Chateau Mareuil cloth covered most of it, but beneath the cloth, she saw crumpled linens and what looked like small glass toiletry bottles. The smell was horrific. Rotting cloth, damp mildew, and something else, something like decaying flesh, faint but present. On impulse, Eleanor lifted one of the sheets. It fell apart in her hands, soaked through, slimy, and discolored. Beneath it was a set of small, numbered keys. The same kind used decades ago by hotel staff. She took one, key number 606, and found that its metal was warped, corroded at the edges, as if it had been exposed to acid or fire. The cart's wheels were frozen in place, cemented by time and filth. But there were drag marks beneath it, fresh ones. As if the cart had been moved recently, not by staff, but by something else. Something that didn't want to be seen. Eleanor backed away slowly, resisting the urge to check if the door to 602 would open. It remained sealed, but now the air around it seemed to breathe with quiet malevolence. Eleanor barely made it through dinner, unable to shake the image of that cart. When she returned to her room, she noticed immediately that something was off. The air inside felt humid, almost tropical, with a metallic tang that made her throat tighten. She approached the bed hesitantly. The sheets, those pristine, eerily white sheets she had grown to distrust, were wet. Not soaked, but damp in a way that suggested they'd just been handled with dirty hands. The smell hit her next. The same stench from the maid's cart now clung to the linens, mold, rot, something sour. She touched the fabric. It stuck faintly to her skin, and a dark stain was beginning to form where she pressed down. Her breath caught. It wasn't water. It wasn't sweat. Something had touched the bed. Or worse, something had lain in it. The realization came slowly, sickeningly. Whatever had moved the maid's cart, whatever had walked past her door, whatever had watched her through the mirror, it had been in this room. In this bed. Perhaps even while she had slept. She backed away, unable to scream, unable to move for a long while, until the sound of slow, dragging movement echoed faintly from just outside the door again. Eleanor refused to spend another night in room 606. She packed a blanket and her coat and crept down to the lounge on the ground floor, which remained dimly lit overnight for guests. The couches were firm, and the fireplace cold, but at least the air didn't taste of mildew. She found a quiet corner behind a heavy armchair, curled up under her coat, and closed her eyes, just for a while, she told herself. But sleep never truly came. Instead, her mind floated in that strange space between wakefulness and dream. In that liminal silence, a faint whisper pierced the quiet. It wasn't sharp or angry, it was coaxing. Beckoning. She tried to ignore it. Then it came again. Her name, uttered slowly, Eleanor. She bolted upright. The lounge was empty. The clock above the fireplace read 3:09 a.m. She pressed her palms over her ears and shut her eyes tight. Still, the voice persisted, not from the room, but from inside. Inside her thoughts, inside her bones. The same voice echoed from her sixth-floor mirror that first night. It wasn't the voice of someone alive. It was soft, low, cold. And persistent. She fled the lounge and tried to find a staff member, anyone, but the front desk was unmanned, the night clerk missing. Only the lamps remained, flickering. In desperation, she glanced at the elevator. It was on her floor, floor 6. Its door stood open. The light above it blinked, "Come back." She ran toward the stairwell instead. But the whisper had done its job. Something now connected her to the 6th floor, and it wasn't finished with her yet. At dawn, Eleanor returned to the 6th floor, not out of courage but necessity. She couldn't leave her passport and belongings behind. Her keycard buzzed red when she tried to unlock the door. Odd, she was certain she hadn't changed the card. She pushed the handle instinctively. The door swung open with ease. It had been unlocked the entire night. No. Not just unlocked, open. The handle moved with no resistance. She was sure, absolutely sure, that she had locked it before going downstairs. She had even double-checked. Her luggage was still there. Her coat on the chair. But the bed was undone, the sheets halfway pulled off, like someone had climbed in and out during the night. The air inside the room was heavier than before. Moist. The kind of humidity that clings to old basements. She stepped inside cautiously. Everything looked the same, but felt different. Her gaze turned toward the mirror. Its surface was fogged, as if someone had breathed directly onto the glass. On instinct, she reached out. The glass felt warm. Then she saw it, faintly etched into the mist was a symbol. A circle intersected by a diagonal line, like a crossed-out eye. It hadn't been there before. She wiped it away and backed toward the door. But the room had already reasserted itself. The whispers were gone, but the presence remained. She knew now, leaving hadn't severed the connection. It had only deepened it. Later that day, Eleanor began to notice details that hadn't caught her attention before. The hallway at the far end, past room 617, seemed longer than it should be. As she walked toward it, her shoes tapped against uneven wood beneath the carpet. The pattern on the wall faded into obscurity, and the wallpaper there was peeling, revealing old plaster beneath. Something compelled her to pull at it. Beneath the curling edge, she uncovered the faint outline of a door, no knob, no frame, just a seam in the wall. She pressed gently. It gave slightly under her weight, like something old and reluctant to open. When she pushed harder, the door creaked inward, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. It wasn't listed on the hotel map. No signs pointed toward it. And it was old, the stone steps beneath her feet were worn thin by time, and the walls were lined with iron sconces long cold. She stepped down 2 or 3 steps before the air changed, growing dense, damp, and filled with a scent of burnt fabric and old roses. A faint red glow flickered far below. Eleanor froze. Something moved in the shadows, not fast, not aggressive, just present. She shut the door quickly and pressed the wallpaper back over it, her heart hammering. She didn't know what was down there, but her gut told her it was older than the hotel itself. And that it hadn't forgotten the footsteps that once echoed in that dark. Outside the hotel that afternoon, Eleanor sat on a bench in the cold wind, unsure whether to cry or scream. That's when the man sat beside her. He was elderly, with eyes that seemed to squint against something only he could see. Dressed in a brown overcoat, he seemed like just another tourist at first. But when he spoke, his voice cracked like dried wood. "You're staying on the 6th floor, aren't you?" he asked, not waiting for confirmation. "I saw it in your face. It always shows in the eyes." Eleanor didn't respond. Her body stiffened. He went on, softly. "I stayed here once. Decades ago. Same floor. Room 606, if I remember right. Beautiful then, but wrong. So wrong." His fingers trembled. "I saw things. Heard things. A woman in the mirror. Scratching behind the walls. My wife, she left me after that night. Said I was never the same." He leaned closer, his breath icy. "You need to leave. Tonight. Don't wait. The longer you stay, the more of yourself you lose. That room doesn't want guests. It wants residents." And with that, he stood and walked away slowly, as though he carried a lifetime of dread behind him. Eleanor watched until he vanished into the crowd. A small part of her wanted to believe he was mad. But deep down, she knew he was right. That night, Eleanor barely allowed herself to blink. She sat on the edge of the bed, fully clothed, with her back to the mirror. The room remained oppressively quiet. Not even the usual hotel murmurs filtered through the walls. Then, the phone rang. The antique rotary phone on the nightstand buzzed to life. She didn't move at first. No one had called before. She had told no one she was here. After 3 rings, she picked it up. Nothing. Just static. She listened, heart pounding. The static slowly warped, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then she heard it, a breath. Ragged. Familiar. It was her own breathing. The pattern, the panic, the rhythm, it matched her exactly. As though a recorder was playing her back to herself. Except, the breathing grew louder, harsher, and suddenly, it wasn't hers anymore. It gasped sharply, then whispered a word. Her name. The line went dead. She stared at the receiver, unable to move. Something had answered. And it was getting closer. The sixth floor no longer obeyed the laws of structure. Eleanor stepped out of her room the next morning, intending to go downstairs for breakfast. But the hallway, familiar and straightforward only a day ago, felt different. Longer. Wider. She took a few steps and noticed the numbers on the doors didn't make sense. Room 610 was now where 612 used to be. The fire extinguisher cabinet was missing. The artwork on the wall, a painting of a foggy forest, was replaced by a faded portrait of a faceless woman. She couldn't recall ever seeing it before. She turned around to return to her room, but it wasn't there. Room 606 had vanished. In its place was 609. Her breath caught in her throat. She walked faster, counting doors, eyes darting between numbers. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if bouncing off unseen corners. The hallway bent ever so slightly, like a corridor in a dream. Then came the sound, a dragging noise. Something heavy pulling itself across the carpet, slow, deliberate, and impossibly close, though nothing was in sight. She ran, heart pounding, and only when she wasn't looking for it did room 606 appear again, slightly ajar. Inside, everything was untouched. But when she looked back down the hallway, it had returned to normal. As though mocking her. As though it had shifted just to watch her squirm. Later that day, Eleanor noticed something wrong with the mirror again. The reflection didn't quite match the room. At first, it was subtle, a slight delay in her movements, a flicker in the corner that shouldn't be there. But as she stared longer, she realized the mirror wasn't showing the present. It was showing something else entirely. Behind her reflection, faint shapes moved. A tall shadow stood just outside the bathroom, unmoving, featureless, yet entirely wrong. She spun around. The space behind her was empty. When she looked back, the shadow was gone. Next, she saw a handprint appear on the glass. Thin fingers. Smudged. Not hers. It trailed down the surface, leaving streaks, like someone watching her from the other side. Then, the lights above her flickered. In the mirror's world, they stayed off. She began recording it on her phone, trying to catch the anomalies, but every playback was blank. Just static. Her face never appeared, as if the mirror refused to reveal its secrets to any device. That night, she covered it with a towel. But in the middle of the night, she awoke to the sound of something breathing just behind the glass. Unable to sleep, Eleanor began pacing the room, obsessively checking the corners, the shadows, and the temperature shifts. Something compelled her to examine the wooden floor near the bed. The boards creaked unevenly in one spot, and when she pressed down hard, it gave way slightly. Curious, she pried it up using the edge of a metal coat hanger. Beneath, she found a small hollow space, dusty and forgotten. Inside lay a single yellowed newspaper clipping, folded neatly but stiff with age. The headline struck her like ice to the spine. Fire claims 2 on 6th floor, mystery surrounds locked room. It was dated March 9, 1971. The article detailed a fire that broke out in one of the top-floor suites, room 606. A couple was staying there on their honeymoon. The husband escaped, but the bride never made it out. The flames had no clear source. Firemen claimed the door had been locked from the inside. The mirror above the vanity had shattered into dozens of pieces, and the fire melted nothing else except the walls near it. The survivor never returned. The room was closed for years, the article claimed. Until recent renovations reopened it. She realized, then, she wasn't the first. And the thing in the mirror may have never left. That night, sleep did not come peacefully. Eleanor drifted into unconsciousness without meaning to, lulled by exhaustion and dread. But her dreams offered no rest. In the dream, she was standing in front of the mirror. But her reflection didn't move. It stared back blankly, eyes wide, lips parted but unmoving. When she raised her hand, the reflection did not follow. Then, slowly, it reached out on its own, its hand pressed against the inside of the mirror from the other side. Panic surged through her chest. She tried to run, but her feet were fixed to the floor. Her breath fogged the glass, and then, without warning, her vision flipped. Now, she was inside the mirror. She pounded on the glass from within, trying to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. On the outside, her own reflection, now autonomous, turned and walked away, leaving her trapped. Her cries echoed only in her own mind. The mirror darkened. The world outside faded to shadow. She woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, nails bloody from clawing her palms in her sleep. The towel she had placed over the mirror was on the floor. And the glass was cracked, just slightly. The next morning, Eleanor finally worked up the courage to confront the front desk staff. Her nerves trembled beneath her skin, but she needed answers. When she asked, calmly, about the history of room 606, the receptionist, a new woman she hadn't seen before, frowned in confusion. She pulled up the reservation list and scanned through it. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, "but we don't have a room 606 listed as active. That room is sealed. Has been for years. No guests are ever placed there." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She showed her the keycard. The woman took it, scanned it through the system, and blinked in disbelief. "This key shouldn't exist," she murmured. "It's registered to a private access code that was discontinued long ago." Eleanor asked who had checked her in. The woman said the person on duty that night, Edward, had been transferred out 3 weeks ago. She turned back toward the elevator. The 6th floor suddenly felt further away. And she began to understand, she hadn't been staying in room 606. Room 606 had been staying with her. That night, Eleanor collapsed onto the bed, her mind teetering on the edge of exhaustion and fear. Darkness fell over the room like a shroud, and her limbs felt impossibly heavy. But she wasn't fully asleep, only stuck somewhere in between. She realized she couldn't move. Her chest tightened, arms paralyzed at her sides, legs stiff as stone. Her eyes flicked open just enough to see the ceiling. Shadows danced above her, morphing and twisting like smoke. But it was the figure beside the bed that froze her breath in her lungs. A woman. She stood inches from Eleanor's face, her hair soaked as if she'd just stepped out of a lake. Her skin sagged and blistered, and her gown, once white, was scorched, fused to her body like melted wax. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came. Not a scream, not a whisper, only the deafening silence of something beyond human. The woman's hand slowly raised, reaching toward Eleanor's throat. Eleanor wanted to scream, to thrash, to run, but her body refused. The moment the fingers brushed her skin, the mirror across the room cracked loudly, snapping her awake. She sat up gasping, drenched in sweat. But her throat still ached, red and bruised, as if the dream had clawed into reality. Still trembling from the night before, Eleanor reviewed the footage from the security camera she'd secretly set up on the desk across the room. She had left it recording continuously, hoping to catch something, anything, to prove she wasn't losing her mind. As she scrubbed through the timeline, hours of darkness blurred past. But at 3:12 a.m., the feed jolted. There it was, her sleeping form on the bed, unmoving. Then a flicker. A shape began to manifest near the foot of the bed. Blurred. Fuzzy. At first, she thought it was a compression error, but it sharpened into something terrifyingly clear. A figure sat there. The same soaked woman from her paralysis. Motionless. Head tilted. The camera buzzed with digital interference, and then the image twisted. The woman turned her head toward the lens, though her face remained out of focus. Static overtook the screen for exactly 33 seconds. When it returned, Eleanor was still asleep. alone. But the sheets near her feet were wrinkled, as if someone had just gotten up. Unable to bear the room any longer, Eleanor stepped into the hallway around midnight, desperate for air. The sixth floor, however, was not any safer than the room itself. As she passed the fire exit, something whispered her name. Soft at first. Almost accidental. She froze. Then it came again, clearer this time. A woman's voice, sharp as wine through broken glass, echoed faintly from the direction of the elevator shaft. It wasn't just calling her, it knew her. Knew her name. The way a mother might call a child. The way someone might beckon a lost soul deeper into darkness. Eleanor's heart pounded. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. Not even the humming of lights. Only silence, and the quiet hiss of someone breathing behind the wall. She broke into a run, passing doors that now throbbed with a strange presence. The air had thickened, as if the hallway itself was inhaling. And with every step, she heard her name again, closer, layered over itself, hundreds of voices now. Panicked, Eleanor grabbed her things and took the elevator down to the lobby. The reception desk was empty. The glass doors stood wide open. She ran out into the cold morning fog, dragging her suitcase behind her, vowing never to look back. She hailed a cab. She gave the driver the address to the train station. He nodded and pulled away from the curb. But the moment she blinked, just once, she felt her stomach twist. The cab slowed. She looked up. They were in front of the hotel again. Not a similar one. The exact same entrance. The same flower pot with one dead stem. The same scratched brass handle. The driver stared at her through the rearview mirror, his face blank. Silent. Without a word, she got out. The building towered above her, as if it had followed her. Or worse, never let her leave in the first place. She opened the door to the lobby, and stepped directly onto the 6th floor. Back in her room, Eleanor stared into the mirror again. No longer trying to avoid it, now daring it. Daring her. The reflection stood still, just like her. At first. Then it blinked. She hadn't. It raised its hand to wave. She stood frozen. It smiled. And her blood turned to ice. It was no longer her reflection. It was wearing her face, but it was something else entirely. The smile widened, unnatural and mocking. Behind the glass, the mirror world looked darker, thicker, as if filled with smoke or water. A hand reached up from below the reflection's chest, another hand, not hers, and rested gently on her double's shoulder. There was someone else in there. The lights flickered. And for the first time Eleanor knew, the thing inside the mirror wanted out. After the incident with the mirror, Eleanor couldn't bring herself to sleep. She paced the room like a caged animal until the silence drove her to investigate. The wall beside the vanity had always looked off, slightly bowed, with a faint outline running vertically through the wallpaper. Driven by a sudden impulse, she began peeling it back. Beneath the aged paper, her fingers traced a hidden seam. She tugged, and the panel shifted with a groan, revealing a narrow recess filled with dust and darkness. Inside, draped in time and cobwebs, hung a wedding dress, aged, scorched along the hem, and reeking of mildew and smoke. Its lace was yellowed, but there was no mistaking the burns, the singed fabric as if someone had been consumed by flames while wearing it. Pinned to the chest was a brittle photo of a woman smiling, a younger version of the figure she'd seen. Eleanor's heart stilled. It wasn't just any spirit. It was her. Obsessed with answers, Eleanor broke into the records room near the manager's office, a room left perpetually locked but oddly open that night. Inside, she sifted through crumbling guest ledgers and faded newspapers. One headline, dated July 1952, caught her eye: Tragedy on 6th floor, bride perishes in wedding night blaze. The article described a young woman named Annabeth Carlyle, who had checked into the hotel with her new husband for their honeymoon. That night, a fire broke out in room 611. Only one body was ever recovered, hers. The husband was never found. Some believed he'd escaped, others whispered that he started the fire himself. But according to the records, the room had been sealed until recent renovations reopened it. Eleanor flipped the guest log again. Room 611 had remained vacant for over 70 years. Until her arrival. That night, exhaustion dragged Eleanor into an uneasy sleep. But her mind did not rest. In her dream, she stood barefoot in a long hallway of mirrors. Her reflection followed her movements at first, but then it stopped. Behind the glass, smoke curled at the edges. She turned. Flames raced down the corridor, chasing her. As she ran, the walls melted into wedding decorations, roses burned black, candles flickering violently. A soft melody played, a wedding waltz warped and slowed, echoing through the inferno. At the end of the hall, a door waited. She reached for it. But the bride was there. Annabeth. She grabbed Eleanor's arm, eyes hollow and filled with grief and rage. Flames engulfed them both. But instead of pain, Eleanor felt herself dissolving, becoming part of the fire, part of the bride's memory. When she awoke, the scent of smoke lingered. The soles of her feet were blackened with soot. In the dim morning light, Eleanor found her suitcase open, though she was sure she had zipped and locked it. Her clothes were no longer folded but laid out on the bed, eerily organized as if for a wedding day. A pair of white heels she never packed sat near the footboard. Her toothbrush had been moved beside a second, old, frayed, and yellowed. The mirror now reflected 2 robes on the back of the door. Everything suggested she wasn't alone. She checked the closet. The wedding dress was gone. On the vanity lay a single note, scrawled in elegant, looping handwriting. "You said yes." Her reflection smiled again that morning. But her own face remained blank. Eleanor finally understood this was not a haunting. It was a replacement. A cycle. The hotel had been waiting. Not for a guest. But for her. It had chosen her. Annabeth's spirit didn't want to be freed. She wanted a new vessel. A new bride. Someone to continue the endless wedding night, to relive the final moments forever. Eleanor tried to leave again, stairs, fire exits, even the ventilation shafts. Each attempt led her back to room 611. Time no longer followed logic. Her phone showed a date from 1952. Her reflection blinked a full second too late. The walls pulsed as if breathing. Outside her window, the city no longer looked familiar. She understood now, she could check out 100 times, but she would never leave. Because the hotel didn't trap guests. It kept them. The mirrors in room 611 no longer showed Eleanor's face with clarity. Her features were softening, melting into someone else's. Names slipped from her mind. Her phone, once filled with photos of her life, now displayed only sepia-toned images of strangers in mid-century clothing. She tried writing her name again and again in the notepad beside the bed, but every time she blinked, the letters rearranged themselves into Annabeth. Her memories felt like photographs left out in the rain, edges curling, details blurring. When she looked at her reflection again, it smiled with familiarity. Not because it was her. Because it remembered who she used to be. The modern touches of room 611 faded overnight. The flat-screen television vanished, replaced by a boxy black and white set. The carpet turned into aged parquet wood. The air carried a scent of old perfume and smoke. Even the view outside morphed, tall glass buildings replaced by vintage cars and gas lamps. The hotel had rewound time. It wasn't just haunting Eleanor. It was rebuilding the past around her. The phone rang once. No number. No message. Just the sound of faint breathing. She didn't pick it up, but it didn't stop. Nothing ever really stopped in room 611. That evening, as the hotel clock struck midnight, a knock echoed from the hallway. Standing there was a bellhop in a crisp red uniform, his face pale and sunken. He held a folded note and a tarnished room key. The note read simply, "It's time." He extended the key with a stiff arm. Eleanor took it without thought. The bellhop didn't speak. But as he turned and walked away, his feet left wet, blackened footprints on the carpet. The air reeked of ash. And as he reached the elevator, he vanished before the doors even opened. The old room key didn't fit the main lock, but Eleanor felt a pull toward the back wall, where a faded painting now hung. Behind it, hidden in plain sight, was a small, rusted keyhole. The lock clicked open with a groan that sounded almost like a sigh. Inside was a narrow passageway, a forgotten part of the hotel. Dust lined the walls. A single candle flickered at the end, illuminating a small chapel with scorched pews and a charred altar. An unfinished wedding ceremony had once been held there. The veil lay on the floor, stained and brittle. She walked in, barefoot and dazed. And the door closed behind her. Inside the chapel, the air thickened. Shadows gathered. And as Eleanor stood at the altar, she no longer felt like a guest. She was home. The gown fit her perfectly. Her skin no longer bore the marks of modern life, only the soft, powdered pallor of the past. She lifted the veil. In the mirror above the altar, the woman staring back wasn't Eleanor anymore. It was Annabeth. The transition was complete. Outside, the vacancy light on room 611 flickered once, then died out. From the street, the sixth floor seemed to vanish again. And high above, through the curtain, a figure in white stood silently at the window, waiting for the next guest. Because the hotel never stopped searching. It just waited. And room 611 was ready.
That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.